If anyone was on fire in Hollywood in the 1980s, then it was Stephen King. The former high school English teacher hit it big in 1973, earning a then unheard of $400,000 advance for his book Carrie. And after Brian De Palma made it into a smash hit in 1976, Hollywood was beating down the front door of the master of the macabre's Bangor, Maine residence. Everything he published, reliably, just 4 years later on average, it would be on the big screen. Big-name directors like Stanley Kubrick, John Carpenter, and David Cronenberg had all directed a King adaptation by 1983. And Carpenter's Christine was in production before the book was even published and came out in the very same year. If you don't count his screenwriting duties on George Romero's comic book-inspired anthology Creepshow, then Firestarter was the fifth film adaptation of Stephen King's work. It's the story of young Charlene McGee and her father, Andy, victims of a secret government experiment that Andy and his soon-to-be wife underwent in college for a measly $200. Andy and his wife Vicky were lucky to survive, emerging with shocking telekinetic abilities, and their daughter born with pyrokinesis, the ability to spontaneously generate flame. The story touches on a lot of recurring King themes in his early efforts. Fantastic supernatural abilities or occurrences which act as a metaphor for adolescence or coming of age, and secret government conspiracies rooted in late 60s anti-war sentiments. This, plus King's fast-paced writing style, make Firestarter an enjoyable, if minor, effort on his part as an author. But how does this movie fare? Did director Mark L. Lester do the story justice? And of course, what can Firestarter illuminate for us about the attitudes towards government secrecy, the exploitation of children, and many issues that lingered in the public consciousness throughout the 1980s? All this and more as we discuss Firestarter.
Charlie McGee is Stephen King's Firestarter. Will she have the power to survive?
The film begins with our hero, Andy McGee, shuffling his young daughter Charlie down the street, pushing against the apathetic crowd, racing against government agents in hot pursuit. No possessions to their name, they're on the run. As Andy scrambles into a cab, he scrounges up his last dollar. Luckily, it's enough for the fare, after a little trickery on his part.
I ain't turning down $500.
Andy's psychic ability is control. He can plant ideas in people's minds, but it comes at a considerably painful cost. While I'm not necessarily a big fan of actor David Keith's choice or the direction to grab his entire head like he's controlling a laser beam coming out of his brain, like a haphazard dollar store Professor X, I was impressed with the agony he so clearly feels upon expending his power. He's racked by pain. His abilities take a very visible toll on him, which I suppose serves the story purpose of precluding their use in a manner which might explicate them from all of their troubles, but it also demonstrates the recklessness and haphazard nature of the experiment to which Andy was subjected. It was a shoddy installation. It gave him this ability, but it doesn't jive with his biochemistry. It's killing him.
He's doing something to his brain.
Like what?
Giving himself pinprick hemorrhages, maybe?
David Keith is welcome casting as Andy, the put-upon father whose life is essentially forfeit. His single-minded aspiration is to deliver his daughter from the clutches of their pursuers, to give her a full, normal life. Her birth was not a crime, and Charlie is no one's property. Keith affects a kind of simple Southern charm, absent in the book where Andy is a college professor, much like Ben Mears, the protagonist of Salem's Lot, another cipher for King himself. But in the film version, he's thankfully an average guy. Maybe somebody who would have been drafted into Viet Nam had he been a little older. But now, he's got to pay the piper anyway, at the hands of very similar men, who instead of shipping him to Saigon, might press him into a servitude of a different kind. Or worse, Charlie will be sentenced to this, a fate worse than death, of the government getting a hold of you. This fear, so palpable in the late 1970s and 80s in films like E.T., Scanners, or De Palma's The Fury, of being special, and as a result, being subjected to testing, to experiments, closed off from society, and maybe, as it's implied, forced to be used as a weapon of war against the enemies of America. The government agents in Firestarter are very much what you might think. Suits well pressed, their leader Cap, played by Martin Sheen, who, despite his Spanish and Irish origins, comes off as the predictably waspy Good Shepherd deep state type. His agents are violent subverters who dispose of the inconvenient and preside over lurid experiments, but it's all couched in this colonial revival Americana atmosphere. In the story, this devious organization is called The Shop, and they're top secret, which gives King an out to not exactly impugn the entire US government, but who are we kidding? These guys are the CIA. They're the guys they don't tell the president about. There was a sort of palpable change in the political winds during this time, seen evidently in this movie. The government had done a lot in the eyes of King and many other artists, and perhaps the public, to discredit themselves to the point where audiences didn't need a whole lot of extra context to understand and sympathize with the plight of two people who don't want to cooperate with the CIA.
These two folks are wanted for questioning, nothing more.
I don't care if they're wanted for assassinating the president. Show me a warrant to get the hell off my land.
Now, of course, we see that these agents will go to extreme lengths to command obedience. They kill Andy's wife, Vicky, in pursuit of Charlie, which is also David Keith's standout moment. This intense and frenetic scene of a man seeing his entire world crumble around him engenders our sympathy and gets our hackles up. I also appreciate the subtlety in directing and performance in the moment when Andy must quickly internalize his wife's brutal death and then pivot instantly to protect what remains of his life, his daughter. He has no time to mourn. He must act. These are the kind of cold, quick rationalizations most of us hope never to make. The moment, too, where Andy manages to save Charlie is powerful, great in the book, well preserved for the film, when Andy makes the choice to punish these men, blinding them in the prison of their own minds.
You're blind. You too, you son of a bitch. You killed my wife. You're blind.
This treachery would obviously shake your loyalty in any government institution that tried to conscript you, but I just can't see this sort of sentiment playing, say, in 1950, where the government portrayed this way. Or even in 2009, the Obama-Afghanistan years, where, hell yeah, the Transformers are on the side of the U.S. Army. Let's go. Sign me up, baby. I think that in that pre-Viet Nam world, the ambient pull to civic duty, God, and country would compel one to use their abilities to repel America's enemies. In the early 80s, not so. And the audience sympathizes. Plus, everyone and their grandma recoiled at E.T. being poked and prodded by the feds. Drew Barrymore especially. Barrymore obviously rocketed to fame as Elliot's sister and everyone's favorite E.T., and her rise in the production of this film is fortuitous. She's great in it. She has a cute whimsicality while also portraying subtle depths and strong emotion. The moments in which she comforts her father, and for a moment the weight of the world evaporates from his shoulders, are tender and wonderful. This is, for me, what the movie and the novel are really about. The stress of parenting. Obviously writ large here, but it portrays the length to which one might go to give their child a better life, to shield them from the onslaught of the cold, hard world. Unfortunately, the film skirts some other ideas of the book, a secondary theme that uses the idea of fire-starting powers as an allegory for pre-adolescent toilet training, crying, and other chaotic behaviors exhibited by young children that put stress on the parents and the world at large. Charlie's outbursts of flame, being feelings or abilities beyond her understanding or which she can only narrowly control, can, I think, be seen as a puberty stand-in as well, coupled with the shame Charlie associates with the use of her abilities and a reticence to exhibit them.
Something might happen.
After a strong streak of evading the government's clutches, Charlie and Andy are finally subdued by the master assassin John Rainbird, played by George C. Scott, in a very memorable scene in which he, as a sharpshooter, tranquilizes them from a nearby tree. This is a picturesque scene set on the dock of a lakeside house, and it's a mesmerizing moment when these fire suit-wearing agents emerge from the forest to seize their prey.
Nothing to it.
Rainbird is cool because he's George C. Scott for one, but also a military guy is badass when he gets to dress however he wants on the mission. This scene took place at a remote rural cabin in the novel, and this setting is great, very cinematic. And though I'm no tactical expert, I can't imagine wanting to shoot someone in the neck with a tranquilizer dart so close to a body of water where they could easily doze off, fall in, and drown. Either way, Charlie and Andy are locked away at the Virginia base of the shop, in a sort of mocking display of ornate southern grandeur, with the windows barred, the worst part being their separation from the other. Andy is drugged and pacified. His psychic powers appear to have significantly diminished. Charlie, however, still powerful, is unmoved by any positive reinforcement or goading that might have swayed, say, a regular child, one that hasn't been hardened by death, poverty, and treachery, refusing to ever again light fires Charlie sits in quiet protest. But John Rainbird has a plan, disguising himself as a humble janitor and playing the role of a lowly veteran with PTSD who's scared of the dark to engender Charlie's trust while her father wastes away in the other room. Rainbird is the most interesting character in the book. In the novel, he's Native American, which gives him a sort of otherness and a cultural explanation for his interest in his work of killing. See, he appeals to ideals like the Great Spirit or more ambiguous interpretations of the division between life and death, and sort of understands Charlie's power as a spiritual power. This is mostly congruous with the ambient feeling around the supposed natural state of the Native Americans so common in hippie culture of the 60s and that pervades horror films of the 70s and 80s, films like The Manitou or Wolfen. Here, John Rainbird is played by the great George C. Scott, who, while not being an American Indian, or I guess it's sort of implied that he is because of his, ponytail and jacket, still does a wonderful job with the role because he captures the essence of what is most important to it, the ability to come off as fatherly, as a gentle presence, while also being able to play rugged, tough, and insane.
Good night, kid.
Scott excels in films like Day of the Dolphin or Hardcore, where he plays sympathetic father figures with a bit of an edge, and he always comes off as intelligent. His maniacal designs on Charlie, while offending the sensibilities of the other killers in the shop, are still so devious and abstract, you feel they could only have come from someone who had given it a lot of philosophical thought. Less so in the film, where it's somewhat dumbed down, but you do get the idea.
It'll be quick. And he'll be looking at her face at the time. He will know her power. And when he dies, which I hope is very soon, perhaps he can take that power with him into the other world.
Rainbird complicates Charlie's relationship with her father and with the shadowy government agency through an affected, folksy demeanor and simple outlook on life. He paints himself as a person not unlike Charlie. No, he's not a little girl, but he's a sort of marginalized person all the same, disfigured in the war and a pawn in a small way of the government men, just like Charlie. He counsels that she give them what they want, but be sure to get something in return. So Charlie commits to demonstrating her awesome powers, and director Mark L. Lester does a great job here. Does the wind whipping up around Charlie's face make a whole lot of sense? No, not really, but it's a great visual. The combination of Barrymore's performance as she concentrates on both executing the flame but also keeping it under control is terrific, played against the gallery of excited spectators who watch with bated breath and then shock and awe at what they've seen. The set design of the government laboratory is terrific, and Tangerine Dream's musical score has this great, upbeat, and sometimes probing, mysterious quality. The driving synth beat punctuates the impressive blend of science and supernatural. Ultimately, Andy tricks the guards, stops taking his meds, and enlists an unwilling Martin Sheen into his plan, taking over his mind and demanding a rendezvous with Charlie, in which their escape will be facilitated. In the novel, King added an interesting twist to the framework of Andy's psychic abilities. ESP had been sort of done to death by both King in The Shining and Carrie, and also many other imitators, but Andy's powers were different. Haphazard, like I mentioned before. In the book, his mental commands, his pushes, might at once elicit obedience, but they could also create what King referred to as an echo, psychic aftershocks or ramifications that can cause Andy's victims' mental instability. For instance, in the novel, Cap is driven to madness. A simple mental command from Andy inadvertently dredged up his buried fear of snakes, which causes him to see snakes everywhere. Ultimately, he mistakes a hose for a snake in the penultimate scene of confrontation between himself, Andy, Charlie, and Rainbird in the horse barn, which causes Rainbird to momentarily lose focus and divert his aim for a brief second, providing Andy a narrow window to strike back mentally. I know this idea of mental echoes and subversion of the brain was probably a difficult concept to convey in a film, or at least it was perhaps beyond Lester's abilities and was scrapped, which ends up making the blocking and sequence of events in the final standoff a little wonky. Nevertheless, the core of the conflict is there. Charlie's love for her father, but reticence to harm John Rainbird, whose confusing betrayal she cannot fully understand. Rainbird might not understand it either, his final line of dialogue being,
I love you, Charlie.
spoken as he is attempting to murder, momentarily before he is inevitably burned to an absolute crisp and flung across the room. John Rainbird's obsession with Charlie stems from a need for control. He's a mind-bender of sorts as well. By manipulating her affections, gaining her trust, taming her powers, and then ultimately killing her, in his mind he will in some sense absorb her power, have total control over her essence and being. This attempt at a power dynamic struck me as sort of pedophilic. Without the sex, obviously, but similar urges, I imagine, exist. There are a confluence of predictive elements that run latently through Firestarter, the book and film, that either presage future events or play on anxieties running through the current of society at the time. High-profile instances of child kidnappings and murders were pervasive on the nightly news. The innovation of the missing child milk carton in the early 80s added to an ambient feeling in the nation that children were being preyed upon en masse. The very same year of Firestarter's release, Wes Craven unleashed the undead child killer, read pedophile, Freddy Krueger upon the world in his film A Nightmare on Elm Street. Stephen King's own novel, It, and its chilling child-murdering clown entity echo this. While Rainbird's goals are existential, spiritual, deranged obviously, they do have a grounding in the supernatural, but the predatory nature is there, and the confused love he has for his ultimate victim makes it all the more perverse.
That's it. So I can see your eyes.
And ultimately, I think it's fair to examine the young Barrymore as a star personality. A sprightly young talent, a beautiful young girl swallowed up by Hollywood excess, drinking at age 9 while accompanying her socialite mother to parties at Studio 54. I'm sure it was all very amusing to the negligent and licentious adults in her mother's social circle, but it culminated in a lengthy stay at a rehab facility for Barrymore at the incredibly young age of 13. I don't think there's any other word but tragic to describe the childhood Drew Barrymore endured. In that way, it absolutely parallels the fraught existence of Charlie McGee, living moment to moment, lent out to adults to configure their self-serving schemes to exploit a child, whether it be for money, entertainment, and fame, or God and country. Perhaps this was the fate they deserved. There's something incredibly cinematic about the idea King had of a little girl in pigtails and overalls standing athwart a battalion of well-suited government men and obliterating their weapons, their castle sanctuary, their very lives with fire. Herself standing aloft, untouched, a halo of protection around her small body, moving slowly forward among the fray as chaos explodes at her feet. And with horses, beautiful caged horses, the most beloved animal of little girls everywhere, running wild and free in her wake. It might be the most cinematic image he's ever conjured. Does the film do it justice? Mightily. Though I don't know, I'd recut it to be a little faster, maybe lose those fireball rockets, opting instead for things to simply explode. But I love it. And I love the haunting images of this colonial house burning. It's oddly perverse, because it inspires thoughts in the viewer not just of Viet Nam-era spooky government goons, but of the founding fathers as well, of Jefferson and his Monticello. What does this mean? Had Richard Nixon and Robert McNamara and everyone behind MKUltra, the project whose fallout would birth Ted Kaczynski, deserve to go up in flames? To face rebellion from its victims? Perhaps in the form of manifestos and random bombs in the U.S. mail? Is the betrayal of a little girl's trust an allegory for us all? Should we start fresh in a pillar of fire? These are questions I'm sure were swirling around in King's mind. He is, at his heart, an old hippie liberal, after all. And how about Mark L. Lester? Well, perhaps the director of Commando and Truck Stop Women dwelt less on these questions. But he made a pretty great movie nonetheless.